What if the system you trusted most turned against you in broad daylight? What if the person everyone called Defendant was actually the one holding the highest power in the room? This isn't just another courtroom drama. This is a real undercover-style story of arrogance, betrayal, and the most shocking reversal you'll ever see inside four walls of justice. Welcome to today's Celebrity Undercover Story, a story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, prejudice, and truth. Stay with us, because in the next few minutes you'll see how a single woman in robes destroyed an entire web of lies, and why this story is being called one of the most brutal cases of instant karma ever witnessed inside a courthouse. If you love Undercover Boss, Undercover CEO, and Celebrity Undercover Stories, this is the kind of moment that will stick with you long after the screen goes dark. There are mornings that feel ordinary. You wake up, make coffee, step into your daily routine, and expect nothing more than the predictable rhythm of life. And then, there are mornings that break history in half. Mornings that begin in silence but end with echoes that will never fade. This was one of those mornings. Downtown Magnolia, a southern city known more for its courthouse than its skyline, was alive with its usual bustle. Lawyers hurried across the plaza, interns carried stacks of folders, and citizens lined up to contest parking tickets or await hearings that could decide the course of their lives. The courthouse itself stood tall, marble pillars catching the pale morning light, an institution that promised order, fairness, and justice. At least that's what the plaque above its entrance said. On those very courthouse steps walked Naomi Carter. She was 52 years old, black, with silver strands threading through her dark hair, and a stride that carried quiet confidence. To anyone watching, she looked like another professional woman with a briefcase, well-dressed, composed, prepared for a day of work. Nothing about her revealed what she really carried in her past, or the authority wrapped around her like an invisible cloak. That morning, she wore no black robes, no badge of honor, no visible symbol of the position she had held for more than 2 decades. Instead, she was dressed in a simple navy suit, holding a leather case filled with legal documents. And because of that, to the wrong eyes, she was invisible. Worse, she was vulnerable. At the top of the stairs stood Officer Brent Collins, a man in his 40s with the squared jaw of someone who believed his uniform placed him above accountability. He was the kind of officer who carried himself like the courthouse belonged to him, not to the people. The kind of man who had been called disciplined by his superiors, but dangerous by anyone on the wrong side of his authority. As Naomi approached, Collins narrowed his eyes. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. And then came the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. People like you don't belong in places like this. The sentence hung in the air like poison. A few pedestrians slowed, sensing trouble. Naomi, steady as stone, responded with silence, her hand tightening around the handle of her briefcase. She didn't flinch, but the words landed all the same, loaded with contempt, heavy with centuries of echoes. Collins stepped forward, blocking her path with his arm. "What's in the case?" "Stolen documents?" he spat, his voice louder now, inviting an audience. "You think you can just walk in here and play lawyer?" "Not today." Before Naomi could open her mouth, his hand struck across her face. The sound was sharp, echoing against the courthouse walls. Her head snapped sideways. The briefcase slipped from her hand, scattering papers across the steps like confetti from a cruel parade. Gasps rose from the crowd, A few people instinctively pulled out their phones, some to record, others to call for help. But no one stepped forward. The system had taught them that interfering meant trouble, and trouble with men like Collins always came with consequences. Naomi stumbled back, but her eyes clear, dark, unbroken lifted toward the entrance above her. There it was, etched into bronze. Magnolia County Courthouse. The words glinted in the sunlight, steady and unmovable, like a reminder of who she was and what she carried within her. Collins didn't see it. He didn't notice the way she looked at that plaque, as though it was speaking only to her. He saw only what he wanted to see. A black woman out of place. Someone he could dominate. Someone who didn't deserve respect. With one rough motion, he grabbed her by the throat, shoving her back against the cold stone wall. Metal cuffs clicked tight around her wrists, biting into her skin. He leaned close, his voice dripping with hatred. You belong in a cage, not in a courthouse. Other officers gathered. Some chuckled, others pulled out their phones to film. To them, it was entertainment. Another woman put in her place. Another lesson taught by their colleague who never seemed to face consequences. Naomi's jaw throbbed from the blow. The sting of humiliation burned across her skin. Yet, she remained silent. Her eyes stayed locked not on her abuser, not on the laughing officers, not on the crowd frozen with fear. No, her eyes stayed fixed on that bronze plaque, on the building she knew better than anyone else standing there. Inside her mind, a storm gathered. She knew exactly who she was. She knew the authority that lived inside her name, inside the oath she had sworn more than 2 decades ago. And she knew that in a matter of hours, the same courtroom Collins thought he ruled would be the stage for his undoing. The morning sun continued its climb, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps. To most, it looked like another case of unchecked power. One more story of humiliation that would fade by evening news. But to Naomi, this morning was different. Because what Collins couldn't possibly know, what none of the laughing officers could imagine, was that the woman they had just cuffed like a criminal wasn't powerless at all. She wasn't a trespasser. She wasn't an intruder. She wasn't some stranger trying to sneak in. She was the law itself. And before this day was over, the man who slapped her would stand trembling before her bench. And that's how humiliation on the courthouse steps turned into history inside the courtroom. A police officer who thought he could crush another nobody learned that he had assaulted justice itself. And when justice finally spoke, it didn't whisper, it roared. But this story isn't just about one officer. It's about us. Every grandmother dismissed, every teenager silenced, every doctor handcuffed for living in the wrong neighborhood. They were all in that courtroom, finally heard. So here's the question for you. What would you do if justice looked powerless in front of your eyes? Would you walk away? Or would you stand with her? Share this story if you believe truth will always find its voice. Hit like if you want more celebrity undercover stories that prove no one is above the law. And subscribe, because tomorrow's story might be the one that changes everything. Justice wears robes. Justice sees all, and sometimes, justice hits back. Humiliation has a sound. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet chuckle of bystanders. Sometimes it's the click of a camera phone recording your pain. And sometimes it's the sharp metallic snap of handcuffs closing on your wrists while the world looks away. For Naomi Carter, the sound of humiliation came in waves that morning. The first was the sting of Brent Collins's open hand across her cheek, followed by the gasps of onlookers. The second came when her briefcase hit the ground, spilling its contents in a rain of white sheets, legal memos, handwritten notes, case files scattered like discarded trash across the courthouse steps. The third was the laughter. That low, cruel laughter from men in uniform who should have known better, who should have been guardians of the law, not predators cloaked in badges. Naomi stood pressed against the cold stone, her wrists bound tightly behind her. She could feel the edge of the wall digging into her back as Collins shoved her harder, as though forcing her to fit into the role he had already written for her. The suspect, the trespasser, the problem. "Another faker," one of the officers muttered, grinning as he filmed. "They all act like they're somebody important," another chimed in. "Wait until the judge hears this one." The irony would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so violent. Naomi's cheek throbbed where the slap had landed. She could taste blood at the corner of her mouth. Yet she refused to give Collins the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her breathing steadied. Her chin lifted slightly, even though the cuffs bit into her skin. But humiliation has a way of pressing down, even on the strongest of souls. A woman in a business dress tried to step forward from the crowd, only to be stopped by another officer's glare. "Keep moving, ma'am," he barked. She lowered her eyes and backed away. No one else dared intervene. The plaza that had always felt like a public square now became a theater of fear. Collins enjoyed every second of it, his voice carried like a man used to controlling the script. "Suspicious woman. No ID carrying stolen legal documents, getting mouthy when confronted. Exactly the kind of threat we deal with every day." His words weren't just lies. They were rehearsed lines, polished over years of practice, the kind of false narrative that always seemed to stick. Officers like him had told the same story dozens of times, and courts had listened. Too often, people believed the uniform before they believed the truth. Naomi remained silent, but silence has its own power. Her eyes drifted again toward the courthouse entrance. 20 feet away, the bronze plaque gleamed in the sun. It read, "Magnolia County Courthouse. Justice for all, justice for all." She let those words burn into her mind, anchoring her in the middle of the storm. The humiliation deepened when Collins yanked her forward, dragging her down the steps as though parading a captured criminal. The papers from her briefcase fluttered in the wind, catching on shoes, skidding across the plaza. No one bent down to pick them up. No one dared. "Smile for the camera," Collins sneered, holding her face up toward another officer's phone. The laughter grew louder. To the crowd, it was a show. To Collins, it was domination. To Naomi, it was evidence. Every insult, every action, every recording, each one would matter later. She knew it in her bones. Yet in that moment, she looked like a woman defeated. The bruise forming on her cheek, her wrists bound, her body shoved forward in front of strangers. People whispered in the crowd. "Who is she? What did she do?" Assumptions filled the air, assumptions fed by Collins's performance. Naomi heard every whisper. She let them wash over her like smoke, stinging but temporary, because deep inside she was preparing. She was cataloging every detail, the time, the faces, the words. She wasn't just a victim, she was a witness, and her testimony would soon shake the very foundation of the system Collins trusted to protect him, as the officers pushed her toward the courthouse doors. The final insult came. Collins leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You thought you belonged here? You'll never sit in that courtroom." "Not as long as I'm standing guard," Naomi didn't answer. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was patience. The doors swung open, and the chill of the courthouse interior swallowed them. To the crowd outside, it was over. Just another arrest, another story they'd forget by lunch. But inside, the humiliation was only beginning. The officers would spin their narrative. The prosecutor would nod. The temporary judge would listen. And the system, once again, would tilt against someone who looked like Naomi. But here was the secret Collins didn't know. Humiliation is only temporary when the person you humiliate holds power you can't see. And within a few hours, Naomi Carter would no longer be the one standing in handcuffs. She would be the one holding the gavel. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted from the chaos of the steps to something colder, more controlled. Marble floors reflected the fluorescent lights overhead, giving the space an artificial glow. Every footstep echoed down the corridor like a drumbeat of authority. For most people, the courthouse was intimidating enough. For Naomi Carter, walking in handcuffs, bruised and silent, it was surreal. She was being led through a place she knew intimately. Hallways where she had once exchanged nods with clerks, rooms where she had presided over trials, chambers where she had written rulings late into the night. Now those same halls treated her as if she were an intruder. The irony cut deep. Collins walked ahead, chest puffed out, already rehearsing. His swagger was unmistakable. This wasn't his first time writing a story out of thin air. He had told this script before, dozens of times. Different defendants, same lines. And it always worked. The temporary judge on the bench that morning was Harold Givens, a pale man in his 60s with thinning hair and the weary posture of someone counting the days until retirement. Judge Givens wasn't known for bold decisions. He was known for trusting authority, for moving cases along without rocking the boat. To Collins, he was the perfect audience. Naomi was seated at the defendant's table, wrists still bound. A bruise had spread across her cheekbone, purple and swollen under the harsh lights. Papers from her briefcase had been collected and stacked on the evidence table, labeled suspicious documents. To the casual observer, it looked damning. The prosecutor, Linda Frost, adjusted her blazer as she stood. She was middle-aged, with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. To her, this case looked simple. Trespass, resisting arrest, maybe even assaulting an officer. Cases like this rarely required more than a few hours. She was already thinking about her afternoon docket. "Your Honor," Frost began smoothly, "the state is prepared to proceed." Collins took the stand with the confidence of a man who had played this role before. He cleared his throat, glanced at Frost, and then fixed his gaze on Judge Givens. "This morning, Your Honor, I was conducting routine security protocols at the courthouse entrance when I observed a suspicious individual attempting to breach security," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. His words rolled out like honey, thick and practiced. The defendant, Collins gestured toward Naomi without even glancing at her, was behaving erratically, refusing to provide proper identification. She carried what appeared to be stolen legal documents, and when I approached to question her, she became verbally aggressive. Naomi sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm. But inside, she was cataloging every word, every lie. Judge Givens leaned forward slightly, adjusting his glasses. "And what happened then, Officer Collins?" Collins didn't miss a beat. "When I attempted to detain her for questioning, she resisted. She attempted to flee, and I was forced to use minimal force to ensure public safety. I restrained her with handcuffs, and she continued to shout profanities, claiming to be someone of importance." In the gallery, two other officers, Rodriguez and Thompson, exchanged knowing looks. They had heard this before. Collins's script rarely changed. It was always erratic behavior, always refusing to comply, always minimal force, and yet somehow the bruises on suspects told a different story. Prosecutor Frost nodded approvingly, already convinced. "Officer Collins, in your 15 years of service, have you encountered similar situations?" Unfortunately, yes, Collins said, sighing as though the burden of experience weighed heavily on him. Certain individuals think they're above the law. They make false claims of discrimination to distract from their crimes. I've seen it time and again. The words were a performance, but they landed exactly as intended. Several clerks in the gallery nodded. It sounded familiar, believable, even comfortable. They had read similar stories in the news. They had seen them play out before. Meanwhile, Naomi's gaze never wavered. She sat like a statue, her eyes fixed not on Collins but on Judge Givens. Every sentence Collins spoke dug him deeper into the trap he couldn't yet see. Judge Givens asked, "What about the alleged documents she was carrying?" Collins leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to add weight. "Your Honor, those papers contained judicial letterhead, case numbers, and sensitive information. There's strong reason to believe she intended to impersonate court personnel or commit fraud." Gasps rippled quietly through the courtroom. Frost smiled slightly, sensing momentum. Naomi's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. She knew the papers weren't stolen. They were her own files, her own memoranda, her own daily court calendar. The evidence Collins thought would bury her would soon become the rope around his own neck. But she said nothing. Not yet. Collins finished with a flourish, his jaw tight but his voice steady. "Your Honor, I acted with restraint. I used the minimum force required. Any injuries she sustained were the result of her own resistance." The stenographer's keys clattered as she captured every word. To anyone who didn't know better, Collins looked like the hero of the morning. But Naomi knew better. She lifted her chin, her eyes catching the judge's gaze for the first time. Calm, measured, unshaken. What Judge Givens didn't know, what the prosecutor couldn't see, and what Collins had no idea was about to unravel, was that this was not just another case. This was not just another defendant. And the script Officer Collins had relied on for years was about to collapse under the weight of the truth. Doubt doesn't enter a courtroom with a roar. It creeps in quietly, settling into the spaces between certainty. For most of the people sitting in Judge Harold Givens's courtroom that morning, Officer Brent Collins's words sounded smooth, familiar, believable. But for one person, an intern tucked away in the back row, something about the story didn't add up. Her name was Emily Rodriguez. She was 24, still in law school, still starry-eyed enough to believe the law was pure, but seasoned enough to know corruption existed. That morning, she had shown up early, notebook in hand, ready to observe, to learn, to study the delicate balance between justice and procedure. She hadn't expected to witness something that would change her life. Emily watched Officer Collins as he spun his testimony with confidence. She had seen his type before. Officers who wore authority like armor and expected no one to question them. His story fit too neatly into the template suspect behaving erratically, resisting, forcing him to use minimal force. The words came out too polished, too rehearsed. Then her eyes shifted to the woman sitting silently at the defendant's table. Naomi Carter. The first thing Emily noticed was the woman's posture. Most defendants slouched or fidgeted, betraying nerves or fear. This woman didn't. Even with her wrists bound, even with a bruise spreading across her face, she sat upright, calm, almost regal. Her gaze wasn't darting around the courtroom in panic. It was steady, focused, as if she were evaluating everyone else. Emily leaned forward slightly, studying her. There was something familiar about the way this woman carried herself, something she couldn't place. Not fear, not defiance, something else, authority. Collins droned on about how Naomi had shouted obscenities, how she had tried to flee, how she had pretended to be someone important. Emily's pen hovered over her notebook, but she didn't write. She couldn't shake the feeling that what she was seeing wasn't a criminal being processed. It was something else entirely. Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm, controlled, every word deliberate. "Your Honor, I request the preservation of all courthouse surveillance footage from this morning, specifically between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. The room went still. Defendants rarely spoke like that. Defendants rarely cited time windows or preservation orders. Emily's eyebrows rose. Judge Givens frowned. "You're not in a position to make demands, ma'am." But Naomi wasn't rattled. She continued. "Under Rule 106 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, I have the right to request that any relevant and exculpatory material be preserved. I believe those cameras will show exactly what occurred on the courthouse steps. Emily's pen hit the page this time. Rule 106. Most law students her age could barely recall its application without flipping through a textbook. Yet this woman recited it calmly, perfectly, with the ease of someone who lived and breathed the law. Collins shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. For the first time, Emily noticed the faint tremor in his hand. Prosecutor Linda Frost cut in quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant has no standing to demand evidence without counsel." Naomi turned her head slowly toward Frost. Her voice was even, but her eyes carried steel. "Pro se defendants have the constitutional right to present evidence in their own defense. Sixth Amendment, Brady versus Maryland." "You know this, counselor." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Who was this woman? Judge Givens looked unsettled, tugging at his robe collar. "We'll revisit that request." The murmurs in the gallery swelled. Clerks exchanged glances. A few reporters scribbled furiously. Something about this case wasn't unfolding the way anyone expected. Emily's gaze returned to Naomi. There it was again. That flicker of recognition she couldn't shake. She had seen this woman before, not in the defendant's chair, but somewhere else. Somewhere important. Her memory stirred. A seminar she had attended 6 months ago. A panel on constitutional law. One of the keynote speakers had been a black female judge with a commanding presence and a reputation for fairness. The name had been Carter, Naomi Carter. Emily's eyes widened. Could it be? She flipped through her notebook where she had written down quotes from that very panel. And there it was. Justice must be blind to prejudice, but never blind to truth. Judge Naomi Carter. Her pulse quickened. She looked back at the woman in handcuffs. Same calm voice, same steady gaze, same authority. Emily sat frozen in her chair. If her suspicion was right, the entire courtroom had been duped. Officer Collins hadn't humiliated a trespasser. He had assaulted a sitting judge. The seed of doubt that had quietly sprouted now grew into something undeniable. She scribbled a note to herself. If true, everything changes. Naomi, still silent, turned her eyes briefly towards the gallery. For a moment, Emily swore their gazes locked. And in that fleeting connection, she felt as though the woman at the defendant's table knew exactly what she was thinking. Naomi's eyes said what her lips did not. Wait. The truth is coming. Storms rarely announce themselves with thunder. Most begin with silence, the kind that makes your skin prickle before the first drop of rain falls. That was the silence hanging over Judge Harold Givens's courtroom after Naomi Carter requested the preservation of surveillance footage. It wasn't the kind of statement anyone expected from a defendant in handcuffs. It wasn't desperate pleading or frantic denial. It was precise, grounded in law, delivered with the calm cadence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. For a moment, the courtroom didn't know how to react. Collins shifted in his seat, his earlier bravado dimming just slightly. Prosecutor Frost narrowed her eyes, as if trying to recalculate her strategy. Judge Givens coughed into his hand, stalling, his gavel resting uselessly beside him. Naomi sat still. Her wrists were red from the handcuffs, her face bruised, but her composure never cracked. Her stillness wasn't weakness. It was power contained, waiting for release. "Your Honor," Naomi said evenly, her voice carrying across the room, "it is my understanding that all courthouse entry points are monitored by high-definition cameras. Those recordings will show precisely what occurred this morning." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The idea that her story could be corroborated on video unsettled the neat little narrative Collins had just painted. Collins cleared his throat, forcing a smirk. "With all due respect, Your Honor, those cameras malfunction all the time. Technical issues. You can't rely on them." Naomi's head turned slowly toward him. "Is that your official statement, Officer Collins?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. The question landed with weight. Collins blinked, realizing too late that his dismissal had been phrased too casually. Frost jumped in quickly. "Objection, Your Honor." The defendant is cross-examining the officer without representation. Naomi didn't flinch. "I am merely clarifying," she replied. "Because if Officer Collins is asserting that security cameras conveniently failed during the exact time frame of this incident, then we should also establish that on the record, the stenographer's keys clattered, preserving every word." Collins's jaw tightened. Judge Givens shifted in his chair. "Let's move on for now. Officer Collins, continue." But the rhythm had changed. The script Collins had mastered, calm officer, unruly defendant, quick conviction, was unraveling thread by thread. Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Inside, she was taking measure of everyone in the room. Frost, trying to maintain her composure. Givens, unsettled but unwilling to show it. Collins, whose confidence had begun to crack. And Emily Rodriguez, the intern, scribbling furiously in the gallery, her wide eyes darting between Naomi and the officers. "Your Honor," Naomi said after a pause, "I would also like to note for the record that I attempted to present identification to Officer Collins, which he refused to examine before initiating physical force." Collins barked a laugh, too loud, too forced. "Your Honor, that is absolutely false." She refused to comply. She had no ID. Naomi's gaze didn't leave the judge. "My judicial access card remains in my possession, despite Officer Collins's interference. If permitted, I can present it to the court right now." Another ripple of whispers. Frost quickly objected. "The defendant cannot introduce new evidence without proper chain of custody." "This is highly irregular." Naomi inclined her head slightly, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Irregular does not mean inadmissible. You know that, counselor." The tension was becoming unbearable. Judge Givens tapped his pen against the desk, clearly uncomfortable. "We will review the matter after further testimony." But the seed had been planted. Collins's story, once smooth and unshakable, was now tangled with doubt. Emily Rodriguez could feel it in the air. She watched Naomi with growing awe. This wasn't a frightened woman clinging to technicalities. This was someone laying a foundation, brick by brick, for something much larger. Emily's stomach fluttered with realization. Naomi wasn't just defending herself, she was building a case. Naomi straightened slightly. Her calm presence filled the room in a way no shouting ever could. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I am aware this court will make its determinations based on the evidence presented." That is why I urge this court to preserve all forms of evidence available: documents, body cam backups, and surveillance. Because when the truth comes forward, and it will, we will see clearly who acted lawfully this morning." Her words landed like the first gust of wind before a storm. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't want to admit it. Collins wiped his palms on his pants. Frost avoided Naomi's eyes. Judge Givens glanced toward the clock, as if hoping time would swallow the tension. Naomi lowered her voice just enough to make everyone lean in. "Justice is not afraid of the truth. Only liars are." For the first time that day, silence fell not because people dismissed her words, but because they believed them. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the courtroom knew, whether they admitted it or not, that it was coming. Every courtroom has a rhythm, a predictable order of voices rising and falling, gavel strikes and verdicts delivered. But on that morning in Magnolia County, the rhythm fractured. By the time Judge Harold Givens called a short recess, the air felt charged, like static before lightning. Nobody could quite explain it, but everyone in that room sensed something was off. Officer Brent Collins didn't notice. He leaned against the prosecutor's table, his confidence creeping back. "She's cornered," he whispered to Frost. "All I need to do is keep my story straight." But Collins didn't understand that his story was already cracking. Naomi Carter sat quietly in a holding room, wrists still raw from the cuffs that had only recently been removed. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly. A uniformed bailiff named Henderson stood near the door, his hands fidgeting with the keys on his belt. He had worked in this courthouse for 12 years. He had walked its halls every day, seen hundreds of defendants, escorted dozens of judges. But now, looking at Naomi, his throat went dry. "You look familiar," Henderson muttered. Naomi lifted her eyes, steady and unshaken. "You've seen me before?" Many times recognition spread across his face, draining the color from his cheeks. "Judge Carter," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My God, I didn't realize—" Naomi raised a hand, stopping him. "You weren't part of this. But now I need you to do something for me." "Anything," Henderson said quickly, almost desperately. "I need my robes." The black set with the gold trim. "They're in my chambers closet. Bring them quietly. And bring my gavel, too." "The engraved one." Henderson nodded without hesitation. He hurried out the door, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Alone again, Naomi exhaled slowly. She closed her eyes and centered herself, as she had done countless times before stepping onto the bench. But this time was different. This time she wasn't just presiding over a case. She was the case. Her phone, confiscated earlier but now returned, buzzed on the table. Messages lit up the screen. Her clerk, frantic, asking where she was. Colleagues wondering about delays. She typed a brief response to her chief judge, Margaret Hayes. "Preserve all security footage immediately. Multiple copies. No excuses." Minutes later, Henderson returned, carrying a garment bag and a wooden case. He laid them gently on the table as though they were sacred. Naomi unzipped the bag. The black judicial robes slid free, the fabric heavy, familiar, comforting. She slipped her arms into the sleeves, the weight settling on her shoulders like armor forged from years of service. With each fold draped across her, she felt the transformation begin. She was no longer a defendant in civilian clothes. She was the law. From the wooden case, she lifted her ceremonial gavel. Its handle gleamed, engraved with words she had chosen the day she was sworn in. "Justice never sleeps." She ran her thumb over the engraving, drawing strength from the memory of that day. The oath, the applause, the solemn promise to protect the innocent and hold the powerful accountable. When Henderson looked at her again, he didn't see the bruised woman from the courthouse steps. He saw the judge he had respected for more than a decade, reborn in black robes. "What do you want me to do when we go back in, Your Honor?" Henderson asked softly. Naomi adjusted the collar of her robe. Her voice was steady, commanding. "Announce me properly, as you would on any other day." "Yes, Judge Carter." The bailiff straightened, his back stiff with renewed purpose. The recess ended. People shuffled back into the courtroom, whispering, speculating, unaware of the transformation about to unfold. Collins smirked at Frost, certain that the break would only solidify his advantage. Judge Givens tapped his gavel lightly, waiting for order. Then Henderson's voice rang out, booming with authority. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Naomi Carter presiding the room froze. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then heads turned, eyes widened, papers slipped from hands. From the judge's chamber door, Naomi appeared, not as the battered defendant they had seen dragged inside, but as the commanding figure draped in black judicial robes, gold trim catching the light. In her right hand, she carried the engraved gavel. Her stride was measured, unhurried, the walk of someone who had taken that path thousands of times before. Collins's face drained of color. Frost's mouth opened, but no words came. Judge Givens went pale, realizing he was sitting in a chair that wasn't his. Naomi took her seat behind the bench, her bench. She placed the gavel down firmly, the sound cracking like distant thunder. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, lingering briefly on each face. The stunned clerks, the uneasy prosecutor, the trembling officer who had struck her only hours earlier. When she finally spoke, her voice carried not just authority, but destiny. Court is now in session. The storm had broken. The human voice can transform a room. Sometimes it shouts, sometimes it whispers, but the right voice at the right moment can carry the weight of history. When Bailiff Henderson's announcement thundered through the courtroom, "All rise. The Honorable Judge Naomi Carter presiding." It was more than just protocol. It was revelation. Every person in that chamber felt it like a shockwave. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then came the scraping of chairs as the entire courtroom, out of reflex, rose to its feet. Even Collins, the man who had slapped her on the courthouse steps, found himself standing, trembling, unsure if his knees would hold. Naomi stepped into view, her black robe flowing behind her, gold trim catching the fluorescent lights. She carried her gavel with the familiarity of someone who had commanded this space for more than 2 decades. The bruise on her cheek was still there, stark against her skin, but instead of diminishing her presence, it magnified it. It was evidence of survival, proof of injustice, and a visible reminder of the storm now unfolding. Judge Harold Givens, still seated in the judge's chair, turned ghostly pale. He scrambled to his feet, stammering, I didn't know. Judge Carter, I wasn't aware." Naomi's eyes met his. They weren't cruel, but they left no room for doubt. "Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected delay, Judge Givens. You may return to your docket now. I'll handle this matter from here. It wasn't a suggestion. It was dismissal, wrapped in dignity." Givens practically fled, his robes flaring as he hurried out of the chamber, leaving behind only the faint scent of panic. Naomi took her rightful place behind the bench. She placed her gavel firmly on the desk and surveyed the room. Every gaze was locked on her. Some were stunned, some ashamed, some terrified. Her eyes finally settled on Collins. "Officer Collins," she said quietly, yet her voice carried across the room like a bell. "You may remain standing. The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His earlier swagger had evaporated. His hands, once so steady as he spun his false testimony, now twitched at his sides. Naomi leaned slightly forward. Approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony? Collins stammered. Yes, Your Honor. Let me refresh your memory, Naomi continued. Her tone was measured, calm, the tone of someone who had questioned hundreds of witnesses before. You stated that I was acting erratically, that I was verbally aggressive, that I claimed to be someone important. Do you remember making those statements? Collins nodded weakly. His mouth was dry. Naomi's eyes narrowed. And you also stated, Officer Collins, that people like me need to learn their place. Do you recall saying that? The courtroom held its breath. Every person in that room had heard the phrase before. Some nodded, recalling the officer's smug tone when he said it. Now, hearing it repeated by the very woman he had tried to dehumanize, the weight of those words grew unbearable. Collins's knees threatened to buckle. Yes, Your Honor, he whispered. Naomi let the silence stretch. Then she reached beneath her bench, pulling out a tablet. She tapped the screen. Officer Collins, I'd like you and the court to view some evidence that has just been provided. On the screen, clear footage appeared. Courthouse security camera number 7. It showed Naomi approaching the steps in her navy suit, briefcase in hand. It showed Collins blocking her path. And it showed, with devastating clarity, the slap, the chokehold, the handcuffs. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Some spectators covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The damning words filled the courtroom once more. People like you don't belong in places like this. Naomi paused the video and looked directly at Collins. Officer, do you see any evidence of verbal aggression in this footage? Any profanity? Any threats? Collins opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Naomi's voice cut through the silence. Now let's discuss your claim that your body cam malfunctioned. She swiped to another video file. This is the automatic backup from your body cam, uploaded to the county server every 60 seconds, a system you apparently forgot existed. The footage played. Collins's own voice snarled. Look at this one thinking she can just walk into my courthouse. Time to teach her a lesson. The room recoiled. The air grew heavy with revulsion. Collins gripped the edge of the table to keep himself upright. The swagger, the confidence, the arrogance, it was all gone. In its place stood a man realizing, too late, that he was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. Naomi set the tablet down gently, as if to emphasize that the evidence itself carried more weight than any words she could add. Then she spoke, her voice calm but final. Officer Collins, you said this morning that actions have consequences. You were right, and now you will learn exactly what that means. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the storm no longer looming. It was here, and its first lightning strike had just landed. The silence after Naomi Carter's words was suffocating. Even the steady hum of the courthouse ventilation seemed louder than usual. Everyone in that room understood they were no longer watching a routine proceeding. They were witnessing something extraordinary, a courtroom script unraveling in real time. Naomi let the silence hang before she pressed play again. The video replayed in brutal detail. Collins striking her, the slap echoing like a gunshot, the chokehold, the sneer, the words that now condemned him more than any prosecutor ever could. You belong in a cage. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the back covered her face. A young clerk whispered, "Oh my God." the weight of the truth pressed down on every shoulder. Naomi paused the video and looked directly at Collins. "Earlier, you testified under oath that I was combative, that I resisted, that I became verbally aggressive." Her voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with controlled fury. "Officer Collins, do you see any of that in this footage?" Collins's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. His voice cracked, barely audible. No, Your Honor." "No," Naomi repeated, her tone crisp. "Because it didn't happen." "You lied." The words detonated in the room. No one dared to breathe. Naomi turned toward the two officers seated at the side of the courtroom. "Officer Rodriguez. Officer Thompson. You both corroborated Collins's testimony under oath. You swore that I attempted to bypass security and acted aggressively. Do you wish to revise your statements?" Rodriguez shifted in his seat, sweat beading on his forehead. Thompson's jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on the floor. Neither spoke. Naomi's voice grew sharper. "Answer the court." Rodriguez swallowed hard. Your Honor, I may have misremembered." Gasps rippled through the room. Thompson shot him a glare, but it was too late. The cracks had split wide open. Naomi's gavel struck once, the sound ringing like thunder. "Perjury is not a matter of memory, Officer Rodriguez. It is a crime." The gallery stirred. A few reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against paper as if trying to keep pace with history. Naomi turned back to Collins. "You also claimed that your body cam malfunctioned." She tapped her tablet again, bringing up a second clip, this one from Officer Thompson's camera. The footage showed Collins smirking as he tightened the cuffs around Naomi's wrists. Then Thompson's own voice could be heard, muffled but clear. "Think she's actually somebody important like she keeps saying?" Rodriguez's voice followed. "Nah, man. Look at her. Collins knows what he's doing. Just another welfare case trying to play smart." The courtroom recoiled in disgust. Thompson and Rodriguez looked as if the ground beneath them had collapsed. Naomi didn't flinch. Her eyes scanned the room, making sure every face saw the truth. "So not only did Officer Collins assault me without provocation, but his fellow officers mocked me while recording the crime. And then, all three of you committed perjury in this courtroom." Frost, the prosecutor, shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence drained. Papers trembled in her hands. She muttered, This isn't how this was supposed to go." Naomi's gaze snapped toward her. "No, counselor. This is exactly how it was supposed to go when the truth is ignored and lies are rewarded. But today, the truth has a voice." The tension was unbearable. Some in the gallery stared at Collins with open hatred. Others avoided looking at him entirely, ashamed they had believed his lies for so long. Collins's legs buckled. He gripped the prosecutor's table to steady himself. His earlier arrogance, the smirk, the swagger, the wink, was gone. Now he looked like a man staring into the abyss of his own downfall. Naomi tapped the tablet one final time. The video froze on the moment Collins's hand struck her face. She let the image linger, burned into everyone's memory. Then she spoke slowly, each word cutting like a blade. "This is not just misconduct. This is not just brutality. This is betrayal of the oath you swore to uphold." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. "You thought no one would question your story. You thought your badge was stronger than the truth. But today, your lies unraveled under the weight of your own arrogance." The gavel struck again, louder this time, and this court will not forget it. Collins collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Rodriguez and Thompson sat frozen, pale as ghosts. The prosecutor avoided Naomi's eyes, already sensing her own reputation was hanging by a thread. In the gallery, Emily Rodriguez gripped her notebook tightly. She had never seen anything like this. She wasn't just watching justice unfold, she was watching history bend back into place. The lies had unraveled. And for the first time that morning, the truth stood tall. Truth, once it begins to surface, rarely stops at a single crack. It spreads, seeping into hidden places, unearthing secrets that were meant to stay buried. And in that courtroom, after the videos destroyed Collins's testimony, Naomi Carter knew it was time to widen the lens. One man's lies were damning enough, but the rot went deeper. She placed a thick file onto the bench, the sound of paper slapping wood echoing like a warning. The gallery leaned forward instinctively. Reporters poised their pens. Even Judge Givens, now sitting in the gallery after being dismissed, looked frozen in shock. "Officer Collins," Naomi began, her tone sharp but even, "you have presented yourself today as a seasoned professional, a man who knows his duty. You have reminded us of your 15 years of service. Shall we examine those years more closely?" Collins's head jerked up, panic flickering in his eyes. His lawyer, a public defender hastily summoned during recess, shifted uncomfortably, sensing what was coming but powerless to stop it. Naomi flipped open the file. "According to internal affairs records, you have been the subject of no fewer than 47 complaints over your career." 47, Officer Collins. That averages to more than 3 formal complaints per year." A gasp swept through the courtroom. Collins's shoulders slumped. Naomi held up the first page. Complaint number 1, filed in 2009. A 63-year-old grandmother, Rosa Delgado, alleged that you called her a racial slur during a routine traffic stop and slammed her face into her car hood when she asked for your badge number. The department concluded her allegations were, what was the word? Unsubstantiated. She dropped the page onto the bench and pulled another. Complaint number 12, filed in 2012. Jamal Washington, a 17-year-old honor student, claimed you planted narcotics in his backpack after he refused to provide information about his older brother. Once again, the department found the complaint unsubstantiated. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, louder this time. Naomi's eyes never left Collins. Complaint 23, filed in 2016. Dr. Michael Johnson, a respected cardiologist, reported that you arrested him outside his own home because you, Officer Collins, claimed a black man could not possibly live in such a neighborhood. He spent 6 hours in jail before being released without charges. The department's conclusion? Unsubstantiated. She snapped the folder shut, the sound like a gunshot. The silence afterward was suffocating. "Do you see the pattern?" Naomi's voice rose, but only slightly, every word clear and measured. Dozens of complaints, all dismissed, each one echoing the same accusations: racial bias, excessive force, fabricated charges, and each one buried by a system more interested in protecting its officers than its citizens. Collins's lips trembled. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Collins shook it off. He looked like a man drowning, unable to find air. Naomi stood, stepping out from behind the bench, her robes trailing behind her like shadows. She walked closer to the evidence table, addressing the entire courtroom now, not just Collins. Over your career, Officer Collins, you made more than 1,000 arrests. Of those, 87% involved people of color, despite the fact that Magnolia's population is less than 50% minority. Even more damning, your use of force reports. 63% of your minority arrests involved physical force, compared to just 12% of your white arrests. Do you have an explanation for that disparity? Collins's mouth opened, then shut. His voice failed him. Naomi pressed on. Of those arrests, 432 cases were dismissed, 432 lives disrupted, records tainted, reputations shattered only for the truth to emerge too late. That is nearly 40% of your arrests, Officer Collins. 40% thrown out because of lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or constitutional violations. That is not coincidence. That is not bad luck. That is a pattern of abuse. The gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some courthouse employees bowed their heads, ashamed. Others stared daggers at Collins. Naomi returned to the bench, her voice growing colder. And let us speak of cost. Over 15 years, the county has paid out more than $2.3 million in settlements tied to your conduct. $2.3 million. Do you know what that money could have done for our schools, our hospitals, our communities? Instead, it was spent cleaning up the wreckage you left behind. The weight of her words crushed the room. Collins sat like a man already convicted, his uniform suddenly looking less like authority and more like a costume of shame. Naomi paused, letting the silence grow heavy again. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the courtroom. This morning, you thought you could humiliate me. You thought you could bend the truth, as you have done so many times before, and walk away untouched. But you made one fatal mistake. Collins lifted his head weakly, eyes hollow. You didn't realize who I was. And you didn't realize that the system you thought would protect you is no longer blind to your crimes. The gavel struck once, reverberating like thunder. The lies had unraveled in Part 8. Now, the pattern of abuse stood naked before the world. Every story has a breaking point, the moment when the tension can no longer stretch without snapping. For Officer Brent Collins, that moment arrived under the cold glow of courtroom lights, with every eye fixed on him and every lie collapsing in real time. Naomi Carter let the silence linger after she revealed the damning statistics. Silence is not emptiness, it is pressure. And Collins felt it pressing down on him like a weight he could no longer bear. His collar was damp with sweat. His jaw trembled. His once proud shoulders sagged under the gravity of his exposed crimes. Finally, Naomi spoke. Her voice was quiet, but each word struck like a hammer. Officer Collins, based on the evidence presented before this court, you are guilty of assault, perjury, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The words cut through the air like thunder. Collins's mouth opened as if to protest, but no sound came out. His knees buckled, and he collapsed into his chair. His lawyer reached out, whispering frantically, but Collins shook his head. He looked like a man who had just realized his entire life had been built on a crumbling foundation. Gasps filled the gallery. Some spectators covered their mouths. Others sat frozen, stunned by the speed at which the tables had turned. Just hours earlier, Collins had stood tall, smirking, certain of his untouchable power. Now, stripped of his lies, he sat trembling like a child caught in a storm. Naomi raised her gavel and struck it once. The sound echoed, sharp and final. This court recognizes the seriousness of these crimes. Officer Collins, your actions today were not an isolated lapse of judgment. They were the culmination of years of abuse, lies, and unchecked authority. Today, that ends Collins finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse, broken. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just doing my job. Naomi's eyes locked onto his. Your job is to uphold the Constitution. Your job is to protect citizens, not brutalize them. Your job is to tell the truth under oath, not fabricate lies to protect your ego. Don't call this just doing your job. Call it what it is: betrayal. The prosecutor, Linda Frost, shifted uncomfortably. She glanced down at her notes, then back at Naomi, her face pale. She knew her credibility was now tied to Collins's downfall, and the stain would not wash off easily. Naomi turned her attention to the courtroom as a whole. Her voice rose, not with anger, but with righteous conviction. This is not just about one officer. This is about a system that allowed him to operate unchecked for 15 years. A system that dismissed complaint after complaint. A system that chose convenience over accountability. Every word carried like a sermon. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens struggling to keep pace. Clerks leaned forward, their faces pale. Even the officers in the gallery sat rigid, knowing Naomi's words pierced deeper than Collins alone. Collins's breathing grew ragged. His hands shook as he gripped the table in front of him. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if closing in on him. The humiliation he had once dished out to others was now devouring him whole. Naomi's voice softened, but the softness cut sharper than steel. You told me this morning that I needed to know my place. Do you remember? Collins nodded weakly, his lips trembling. My place, Naomi continued, is here, on this bench, ensuring that justice is served. Your place, Officer Collins, is in the defendant's chair, facing the full consequences of your crimes. Her gavel came down again, a sound like judgment itself. The gallery erupted in murmurs, some voices filled with relief, others with outrage, but all charged with the knowledge that something irreversible had just happened. Collins broke. His shoulders shook, his eyes brimmed with tears. I'm sorry, he whispered, over and over, as if repetition could erase the years of damage. I'm sorry. Naomi's gaze softened, but only slightly. Your apology, she said, is 15 years too late. Remorse without accountability is meaningless. The moment was devastating. Collins, once a symbol of unchecked power, now sat reduced to a trembling figure, exposed before the very system he thought he controlled. The courtroom felt the weight of transformation, the turning point where arrogance shattered and justice reclaimed its place. And as Naomi lifted her gavel once more, the audience knew the storm was far from over. What had happened to Collins was only the beginning. The ripple effects would spread far beyond one officer, far beyond one courtroom. Justice had found its voice. And it wasn't done speaking. The fall of Brent Collins was dramatic, but Naomi Carter knew justice could not stop with one man. Removing a rotten branch does nothing if the roots remain poisoned, and in Magnolia County, those roots ran deep. Naomi lifted another file from the stack beside her. Its cover was marked with a seal from the Department of Justice. The gallery hushed, sensing another revelation. This court, Naomi began, has reviewed not only Officer Collins's history, but the patterns surrounding his conduct. And those patterns are not confined to one officer. They implicate colleagues, superiors, prosecutors, and a system that chose to look away. The words struck the room like a second thunderclap. Frost, the prosecutor, paled visibly. Her hands shook as she shuffled her papers, realizing she was no longer a spectator. She was part of the storm. Naomi turned her gaze on her. Counselor Frost, how many times did your office dismiss complaints against Officer Collins without further investigation? How many times did you accept his testimony as unchallenged fact, despite the glaring patterns? Frost stammered. Your Honor, we relied on the integrity of law enforcement officers. Naomi cut her off. Integrity? When 47 complaints crossed your desk? When 432 cases tied to this man collapsed in your courts? That is not reliance. That is negligence, and negligence in the face of injustice is complicity. The gallery erupted in whispers. Several clerks exchanged wide-eyed glances. A reporter whispered into her recorder, "The prosecutor herself is under fire." Naomi's gavel struck once, silencing the noise. This court will be issuing an order for federal review of every case touched by Officer Collins in the past 15 years. Every warrant he swore, every arrest he made, every testimony he gave. They will be reopened, and those wrongfully convicted will see their day in court. Gasps filled the room. Collins slumped further in his chair, his head in his hands. He wasn't just facing personal ruin. He had just dragged half the courthouse into the abyss with him. Naomi pressed on. But it will not stop there. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, your own perjury today demonstrates that this corruption is not isolated. Your laughter, captured on body cam audio, reveals not just dishonesty, but contempt for the very justice system you swore to serve. The two men froze. Thompson's jaw clenched. Rodriguez looked ready to faint. You will be subject to federal investigation for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights, Naomi declared. You thought your lies would vanish into thin air. Instead, they will be preserved forever as evidence. The courtroom was no longer simply tense. It was electric. The audience could feel the tide of history turning before their eyes. Naomi then shifted her attention to the gallery itself. Dozens of courthouse employees, clerks, and even Judge Givens sat frozen. And to those of you who watched, who heard whispers, who saw patterns and chose silence, I say this: silence is not neutrality. Silence is surrender. If you knew and did nothing, you allowed this corruption to grow. That too must end. Her words struck hard. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others sat rigid, unable to meet her eyes. This morning began with one officer thinking he could brutalize a woman without consequence. But the truth is larger than him. This morning revealed a disease, one that has infected every corner of this institution. And today is the beginning of its cure. She raised another document, this one freshly signed. Effective immediately, this court requests oversight from the Federal Civil Rights Division. A team will review the Magnolia Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. Supervisors, commanders, and anyone who enabled this culture of abuse will face scrutiny. This is not vengeance. This is accountability. The gallery erupted into applause before Naomi's gavel restored order. Even so, the sound carried the energy of a community long starved of justice. Collins lifted his head, tears streaking down his face. Please, don't drag them all into this. This was me, just me. Naomi's gaze was cold but steady. No, Officer Collins. It was never just you. You were the symptom. The disease was the system that protected you. And now the system itself will stand trial. The words landed with finality. Collins sagged back into his chair, utterly broken. Frost stared blankly at her notes, knowing her career was likely finished. Rodriguez and Thompson sat stiff, pale, awaiting their fates. But in the gallery, Emily Rodriguez clutched her notebook with a different expression. Hope. She could see it clearly now. This wasn't just a trial. It was a turning point for an entire city. Naomi raised her gavel again. Justice does not stop at the edge of one man's crimes. Justice demands that every hand that enabled those crimes be held to account. And this court will see that demand fulfilled. The gavel struck like thunder. When Naomi Carter raised her gavel for the final time that day, the sound was not just the closing of one case. It was the opening of a new chapter in American justice. The crack echoed through the chamber like a gunshot of truth, reverberating in the bones of everyone present. And though the trial was local, the impact would ripple far beyond Magnolia County. Officer Brent Collins, Naomi declared, her voice steady. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will face the same system you once believed you could manipulate, but this time as a defendant stripped of your shield." Collins collapsed into his chair, his sobs filling the room. The uniform that once granted him impunity now looked like a costume in a play he no longer controlled. His lawyer stared at the floor, powerless, while Rodriguez and Thompson sat pale and silent, knowing their own day of reckoning was near. But Naomi didn't stop there. She turned toward the gallery, her eyes sweeping across the faces of prosecutors, clerks, officers, and citizens. "This court orders a federal investigation into every case touched by Officer Collins, into the officers who enabled him, and into the prosecutorial decisions that allowed his misconduct to flourish. Justice will not turn a blind eye any longer." And the gallery erupted in thunderous applause, a sound rarely heard in courtrooms. Some people cried openly. Others stood, clapping with a desperation that felt like release. For years, this community had whispered about police corruption, about brutality, about complaints that vanished into filing cabinets. Now those whispers had found their voice, and that voice wore black robes trimmed in gold. The courthouse steps, where Naomi had been humiliated just hours earlier, transformed into a different kind of stage. By the afternoon, news cameras swarmed, the footage of Naomi reclaiming her bench, of Collins's lies being dismantled, of the damning videos, all of it spread online with lightning speed. Within 24 hours, millions had watched the clip of her gavel striking down as she declared, "Justice is not afraid of the truth. Only liars are across the country. People who had once lost faith in the system felt something stir again." Social media erupted with hashtags. #Justice wears robes, #Naomi Carter, #Truth on the bench. Civil rights groups hailed her as a hero. Law schools invited her to speak. Citizens in other cities demanded similar reviews of misconduct cases. For Naomi, it was never about fame. It was about accountability. But she understood the power of a symbol. Her bruised cheek in the photographs became more than evidence of an assault. It became an emblem of resilience, proof that justice could take a hit and still rise stronger. 6 months later, the ripple effects were undeniable. The Department of Justice had placed the Magnolia Police Department under federal oversight. 12 officers were terminated. 4 supervisors faced criminal charges. The district attorney's office was restructured from the ground up. More than 300 wrongfully convicted individuals were released, their lives given back after years lost behind bars. Most telling of all, the courthouse where it had all unfolded was renamed. A bronze plaque was mounted by the main entrance, the same steps where Collins once slapped her. It read, "Here, justice found its voice," dedicated to Judge Naomi Carter, whose courage reminded us all that no one is above the law. When Naomi stood before that plaque during the dedication ceremony, she didn't smile for the cameras. She thought of the countless lives Collins had ruined, the families who had wept in silence, the victims who had been told their stories didn't matter. She thought of Rosa Delgado, of Jamal Washington, of Dr. Johnson. She thought of every file she had read aloud that day, each one representing a life scarred by lies. She raised her gavel once more, not to deliver a verdict, but as a promise. "Justice delayed is justice denied," she told the crowd, her voice carrying through the plaza. "But when justice finally arrives, it belongs to everyone. Today is not just my story. It is yours. And tomorrow it must be someone else's. Because justice does not retire. Justice wears robes, and justice sees everything," the crowd roared. For a moment, the sound drowned out years of silence, years of complicity, years of corruption. For a moment, hope felt louder than despair. Inside his prison cell, Brent Collins watched the news coverage. He sat alone, head bowed, haunted not just by Naomi's words, but by the faces of every person he had once treated as disposable. The man who once believed he owned the courthouse now lived in a cage, finally knowing what it meant to be powerless. Naomi Carter returned to her chambers after the ceremony. She set her gavel down gently, the same gavel that had ended one man's reign of terror and sparked a movement. She exhaled slowly, knowing the work was far from finished. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. Because on that morning, when humiliation turned into revelation, when lies unraveled and truth prevailed, something larger had been born. A reminder that justice doesn't always move quickly, but when it arrives, it wears robes, and it never forgets.